Coming up on Point Spread Weekly, powered by the Vegas Stats and Information Network. We want to make you a better handicapper, and we've got plenty of sports wagering information. Join VSiN's betting experts and odds makers as they discuss sides, totals, money lines, props, and parlays, so you take sharper action. Cashing tickets is what it's all about. It's Point Spread Weekly, powered by VSiN, and it starts right now.
Welcome to Point Spread Weekly. I'm your host, Jonathan Von Tobel, your weekly look at our weekly missive here at VSiN. PSW, of course, is out, and it's out every single Wednesday. Make sure you check it out, and it's a cool little feature we have going on, VSiN.com/subscribe. Guess what? VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. So make sure you check everything out in this week, next week, and every future edition of Point Spread Weekly. We have a great show on tap. Steve Makinen is going to join us momentarily. I'm excited because not only are we going to talk about baseball bullpens, because I have a little bit of baseball fever. I miss watching baseball at this time of year. But we will also talk about recruiting rankings in college football and how we can use that to maybe look ahead toward the future. Ron Flatter joins us as well, and then William Hill will give us his best bets in terms of win totals that he wrote about this week in Point Spread Weekly. So, Steve, I wanted to bring you in here, and actually, before we get into your pieces from this week, I actually kind of wanted to go back to last week, because I think it's a pretty good indication of what we do here at VSiN with Point Spread Weekly. And this isn't a pat myself on the back thing, because we're going to give other people credit too. But I wrote a piece in last week's edition about seeing through smoke screens with the NFL draft, and sometimes what you see is what you get, and you have to really take reports for the NFL draft with a grain of salt. We saw the first round go down on Thursday, and sure enough, all the smoke screens when it came to Justin Herbert being the first quarterback other than Joe Burrow off the board, Tua sliding, the Dolphins want an offensive tackle. If you sifted through all that and realized that Tua's kind of been the guy who was going to be the second quarterback for months, and it was going to be status quo at the top of this draft, and on Thursday night it kind of played out until we got to about 10 or 11, that almost everything that we expected to happen really happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to actually start my visit off with you here, congratulating you guys on a great show last night. Very entertaining, very enlightening. Great to see it. I'm very proud to be part of a Point Spread Weekly, and great to be on with you today. You're right, though, about the draft last night. The first 10 picks pretty much to form, if you want to call it, and then things got interesting. But it's good to have guys like you on people's side, to maybe point out some of these things and not to overreact to maybe some of the things you're reading. So, again, great job on that, and a great issue of Point Spread Weekly because of it.
And Humans has wrote about this too in Point Spread Weekly in the past. This is one of the very few events, Steve, where you are on equal footing with bookmakers, right? Like as information comes out, as the numbers shift, they shift with reports, and so you're on equal footing. What you know is what they know, and they have to react to everything just like you are. So it's one of those rare sporting events where you look at it and you go, hey, me as a bettor, I'm actually at same ground here with odds makers, and that's why I think odds makers for the most part don't really enjoy booking the NFL draft, because there's no power ratings, there's no numbers, there's just, hey, it looks like Tua's falling, we got to adjust. And sure enough, it's just sometimes it's just not true information. So I think that's why bettors enjoy the draft too. Is this is one of the very few events where you and the bookmakers hand in hand are starting from the exact same point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually had a conversation with he actually serves as our designer, Matt Devine, for Point Spread Weekly, and he had a pretty solid night last night following some of the stuff you're talking about here. And we're going to kind of have a wrap-up article about these types of advantages that you can get with the draft with this. And it's going to come in next week's Point Spread Weekly. And it might be something that bettors are going to want to hang on to. And maybe we'll rerun it before next year's draft to show how bettors can get an advantage on the books at this time of year.
Yep. Brady Cannon, of course, in last week's edition as well, had a fantastic piece about this. And just overall, Steve, I just thought our last week's, every issue is great, but if you were really getting ready for the NFL draft, I thought last week's issue was really solid. It was 35 pages. It was chock full of information. Actually, it might have been a little bit more than that, but it was full of information that you could have used for the first round of the draft. And it's what we do on a week-to-week basis with Point Spread Weekly, trying to get you ready and get you information. Not so much picks, but giving you as much info as possible for you as a bettor to use moving forward.
Yeah, with the sports being down here lately, this gave us a great opportunity to really, really dig into the draft and give bettors an advantage. And I think we've done that the last 3 or 4 weeks. And like you said last night, it really paid off for bettors who are watching real closely.
Yep, Steve Makinen with us, of course, editor for Point Spread Weekly. So this week we have a lot to get to, not only with Steve, but I said William Hill and Ron Flatter will join us. This week's edition is fantastic, and there is draft coverage, but there's much, much more to it when it comes to Point Spread Weekly. So make sure to check it out at VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up for your free VSiN Plus sub until a major sport returns. It's Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the sports betting network. So Steve, let's get into your two articles this week. One I'm very excited about, but we'll put it towards the end of this segment because as much as I enjoy baseball and bullpens, I think a lot more people are excited about a potential college football season. So I was actually really interested by this too, though. So recruiting ratings aid college football handicapping is a piece you wrote, essentially looking at recruiting rankings for schools, and we'll get to the specifics of those recruiter rankings and how long you use them for in terms of the parameters. But just what got you started in terms of looking at recruiting rankings for colleges and then tying this into how they perform in a regular season?
Okay, well, the study of recruits and I guess in the numerical value placing on them is a growing market, and there's several sources. I use 247 Sports here to develop this article. There's a growing science, and naturally you would think there's a parallel line there of how teams do on the field as to how they do recruiting wise. And while that is the case in many circumstances, it's not for everyone. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to dig into. So I took a look at recruiting rankings over the last 10 seasons and how they affected teams on the field, which programs maybe outperformed their recruiting rankings, which underperformed, which teams could be surprises in the 2020 season because of it, and which teams are maybe trending in the right or wrong directions based upon recruiting rankings. And it'll give you a good idea of maybe what's to come in the next 3 years of college football.
So I'm curious so obviously we know the schools right near the top, and you mentioned your article, right? The Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, their recruiting classes are just chock full of 5- and 4-star guys. But I'm curious, have you noticed anything in terms of maybe less accuracy with lower tiered conference teams? So for example, right, like a Mountain West team, you hear stories of kids who are being discovered, and somebody at 24/7, which is a very good site, will just go, 3 stars, let's put it there, right? So it's kind of subjective when it comes to the lower tiered kids and how they're rated. So I'm curious if there's that disconnect as the schools get a little bit lower in terms of mid-majors and outside of the group of 5, that you look and say maybe the recruiting rankings aren't as accurate because they're getting kids who are on the fringes here who were just slapped with 3 stars because, hey, we just found out what this kid is and maybe he could be decent.
Of course there is. There's going to be mistakes in that, because a lot of these times they're basing it on speeds or they're basing it on sizes, things that are maybe play out in a college level and a successful thing. But it doesn't take into account maybe below the surface how good of a football player that kid is. So obviously there could be misses. You look at there's a handy feature in the article this week about the projected standings for this season based upon recent recruiting rankings. And if you look at it, there's some teams that really separate themselves. A team like Appalachian State, it hasn't been that great in terms of recruiting rankings, but obviously they've been dominant in the Sun Belt last couple of seasons, and they look to be again this year. So you got to find those types of intricacies and take advantage of them as bettors.
So we'll get to Appalachian State because that is, I think, a really interesting team. And you actually mentioned in your piece, too, with the coaching shifting that's been going on with App State over the last few years. But let's just talk overall about your article here. So you mentioned you used the 3-year time frame with the recruiting classes. Why the 3-year? Why was it more accurate? 1 to 4? What were the issues with those time frames?
Well, I did some regression on this, actually, and I compared the recruiting rankings with my end-of-year power rankings and did maybe a cross-reference of each to find out what was the best time window. I used some different formulas. Maybe the 4th year was more important than this 3rd, and I messed around with all kinds of different formulas. And the one that projected standings the best based upon the end-of-year power ratings was just looking at the average of the last 3 years recruiting classes. So it gives a chance to really show maybe how a team or a coach or a program is developing, I think, in that 3-year span.
It makes a little sense, too, right? I mean, after your 3rd year outside of high school, right, you can go into the National Football League as well. So maybe a 4th year isn't as accurate because when you get that 3rd year, you're getting guys who then would finish their season, go on to the pros, where if you're using a 4-year span, right, those guys who left those guys who were part of that recruiting class could be gone, the top-tier guys, and wouldn't give you an accurate reading.
Well, yeah, and there's some natural fall off of players. The transfer portal gets bigger every year. Not every kid that goes to school has a 4-year career. That's just not how it works out. So I think 3-year, maybe fundamentally just a good way to look at it.
So let's talk about coaching, and this is something you talk about in your article as well, because coaching is a factor. And let's use that Appalachian State example, because if you looked at your top 20 teams whose on-field performances have exceeded their recruiting rankings, number one was Appalachian State. And I think this is going to be an interesting case study for your system here, because you look at it, right? Scott Satterfield was a great head coach. It explains the consistent expectations that they've exceeded up to this point, right? Eli Drinkwitz, though, left after one season. So now we're starting to get some turnover at coaching, and we'll see maybe a little glimpse into what the value of coaching is, specifically with a team like App State. This could be a good case study for it because of the overturn at head coach.
Yeah, no, Appalachian State's doing a hire within strategy, though. So they're keeping things stable. I think that's a big key factor in this. I mean, they have a strong fundamental recruiting base now, and they're sticking with that program. They're sticking with the coaches that may have been part of that recruiting process. So I think there's a lot of reasons to think the reason they're on top of this list, there's fundamental reasons for that.
The next team that really stick out, they all have a common theme: Air Force, Navy, and Army. All three, of course, when you look at the service academies. I'm curious, though, because there's obviously the fact that, and you talk about this, right? All service academies generally thought to be outstanding in terms of their character, but there's also the other common thread, Steve, is that they all run the option, and it's a tricky scheme to prepare for on a week-to-week basis, and I'm sure that factors into it as well, right?
Absolutely. Hey, I could tell you this: my son's team in high school ran the wing T offense. Yeah. You just don't see it that often, and they've run it for 10 years now, and they've won back-to-back state championships with it. It's hard to get ready for teams that run this option, and you just don't spend that much time with it. And those kids are committed to that system, and obviously they build the system because of that.
Yeah, and when I look at your top 20 teams, like the on-field performance exceeding their recruiting rankings, to me the common thread is coaching, right? Like Wyoming, for example. Bull's done a great job with Wyoming. Not a lot of people pay attention to the program. Defensively, he's gotten so much out of that team. I'm a Mountain West football guy, so I understand what the Cowboys have been for a little bit. But to me, that's what it is. Like the common thread is either, like we looked at it with the service academies, the way that they run their offense, or just coaching in general, and as you mentioned, stability.
Yeah, the interesting thing I took out of these two lists here, the top list are the teams, maybe these programs are the coaches that are sought after to go out to other places.
Yep.
The teams that these coaches who tend to lose their jobs or get fired are the ones on the bottom list. The classes are underperforming. So a very, very consistent performance in that regard.
Yeah, going over your list, again, exceeding their recruiting ratings, I think there's 3 or 4 Power 5 teams in this group, right? When you look at it from Kansas State, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State. Yep.
Right. So it's all a bunch of call mid-majors, but outside of the Power 5 conferences, teams that are looking to move up, and that does speak to coaching. And Iowa, of course, we know about Iowa, right? I mean, we know the situation there, and you've had a head coach that's been entrenched for a long time. So let's move over to your top 20 teams with recruiting ratings that have exceeded their on-field performances. So explain that for people who are listening and watching. The recruiter ratings exceeding their on-field performances. So the recruiter ratings are higher, but the on-field performance is a little bit lower than expected, correct?
Yeah, so what I do there is I take their recruiting rankings over what was the last 5 years, and then I compare them to my end-of-the-year power ratings of basically what was expected to happen for that program, and these are the ones that are much worse. I mean, the classes are pretty strong classes that they're bringing in here, but their on-the-field performance is not matching it. And again, these are the types of programs where they're firing coaches a lot. You see right on the top there, Rutgers, new coach this season. They're actually going back to the coach that brought them their best recruiting rankings and their best on the field performance. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Rutgers this season with Schiano.
And the massive difference between this list and the one we were just discussing, a lot of Power 5 teams are on this list because they're named programs, right? They're going to get a lot of these guys just because they are a UCLA, because they are a Texas, because they're Maryland, because they play in their conferences. But it's all about coaching, what you can do with it. And I think one of the teams that is going to surprise a lot of people that's on this list, and they're not high, but they're 12th, is Texas, a team that every single year is back, right, Steve? That a lot of people have a lot of respect for Herman, but it seems like have been somewhat disappointing other than the year they ended it with, what was it, a Sugar Bowl win over Georgia?
Yeah, and this is going to be a real interesting season for Texas. They've had 2 recruiting classes ranked in the top 3 in back-to-back years. So Herman has brought in some very good players. This, as far as talent level goes, this team has national championship potential. We'll see if it can come together for the season. In my opinion, this is a real program to look out for this season, notwithstanding the fact that they're on my top 20 or underachieving list.
All right, so we also have to discuss here some of the teams, again, recruiting who appears to be going in a great direction and recruiting that appears to be kind of taking a step back. And you have a great list of a lot of programs, Appalachian State being one of those, of course, at the top of the list, and these are in alphabetical order. There's a couple that really stick out to me. One, I wanted to start with Colorado, mainly because of the turnover at the head coaching position and what's going to happen there. And again, this is kind of a year-to-year study, right? So I don't think we're going to see what's going to happen, at least the results of it. But Colorado's pretty interesting because of the turnover, and Carl Dorrell has a little bit of work to do with the Buffaloes.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation here. They've had good classes lately, better than the classes we had seen in fact, for the years I studied here, 2010 to 16, their average recruiting ranking was about 63rd in the country. Over the last 4 years, it's 42nd. So that type of trend would show maybe this team's ready to take another step forward. They got a lot of challenges this year with a new coaching system. Montez is gone at quarterback. But there's certainly some foundation there to think this team could take a step forward.
Now, one of the teams that really fascinate me, and again, it's one of the teams whose recruiting has gradually improved, and you have them in your teams that could decline significantly in 2020, that would be Florida Atlantic, because Lane Kiffin is no longer there. And you roll over some of the numbers, because some of the numbers you have were pretty staggering when you looked at the recruiting classes under Kiffin and what they were prior, because Kiffin was a godsend for him, and he made that program very competitive in that Conference USA. And then now that he is gone, it looks like they could take a significant step back.
Yeah, and the other side of that coin is Willie Taggart took classes at Florida State that were extremely highly rated and made nothing out of that. So kind of a double negative here for Florida Atlantic as we enter the 2020 season.
Yeah, the opposite of chicken salad into chicken bleep, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
Usually it's the other way around. All right, so the other piece Steve Makinen's got in Point Spread Weekly this week. Favored Yanks top bullpen rankings, of course, going over rankings for bullpens in Major League Baseball. I don't think it's surprising that the New York Yankees list, Steve. I wanted to ask you, as you went through some of the rankings, was there a team within the top 10 that surprised you when you were going over the numbers that you were like, hey, when I came into this, I didn't expect to rank them this high, but here they are within the top 10, maybe even top 15?
Well, San Diego at number 3, it was sort of a surprise to me. Anybody who follows baseball knows how good Kirby Yates was last season. And maybe you just have to take a second look at the numbers he produced to see just how dominant he was. But for this season, Drew Pomeranz is back. Had a great end of the season run with the Brewers, so he'll be back in the bullpen this year. And Emilio Pagan from Tampa Bay was also pretty solid in the bullpen for them. So they had him this year. Both of those guys were near or above the 12 Ks per 9 rank, and that's one of my favorite stats to look at because it shows you the pitchers that could be really dominant. So they got those two added to the pen here. It's pretty solid even beforehand. So number 3, they check in there. A little bit of a surprise to me.
So how much part of what you did here with your bullpen rankings too is factoring in Parks. So how much you don't have to go into the extreme minutia of it, but how do you factor in Parks when you're looking at this when you're ranking the bullpens?
Yeah, well, obviously closer, you got to look at number 1. You don't want to be blowing games late. I mean that is the biggest, job for a relief staff to take care of business there, get guys out late. The one thing that's going to be very interesting how this affects is the new 3-batter minimum rule. I think it's going to put more importance on having greater depth in the bullpen. You're not going to be able to switch guys in and out. You got to have good guys who can get through full innings at a time here. So you'll need probably more quality arms in the bullpen than you used to.
When you look at rating bullpens and pairing it up with pitching staffs, is there like a barometer for you? Is it like a team that you would look for to maybe win, or I shouldn't say win, contend for a World Series or a league pennant? Like, do you want a top 12 pitching staff and a top 10 bullpen? Are there parameters in that regard?
Well, yeah, I think you want to be strong on both of those accounts, and then and you look at that and maybe a surprise team to look for this season, Tampa Bay Rays. fantastic starting rotation. I have them number 4 on the bullpen. When I did this exercise for the starters about 4 weeks ago, I actually remarked how I thought Tampa Bay, if things maybe fell their way, could have the number 1 starting rotation in the league by the end of the year. So, and it's strange to think that coming from a team that was going with the bullpen starters last year quite often. So they got a very good staff on both the front and back end, and they're definitely a surprise World Series team because of that.
Yeah, the other thing that got to me going over your list is the fact that a lot of these NL Central teams are kind of clumped up in the middle of the pack here with their bullpens, right? The Cubs, the Cardinals right next to each other, 18 and 19. You go a little bit further down. Of course, the Pittsburgh Pirates aren't expected to do much, but the NL Central seems to be, it's going to be a competitive division, but might be one of the weaker ones in terms of the big picture just because the teams overall don't seem to be well built, and the bullpen ratings at least bear that out for some of them.
Yeah, in fact, if you want another surprise team out of that division, the Cincinnati Reds have a pretty good bullpen. I have them number 14 here, but that could easily go up. Their WHIP numbers and their ERA numbers aren't that great. So, I mean, they were giving up runs, but they have some big live arms in that bullpen that could really amount to a very successful bullpen. And if you see a team that starts to get a little better throughout the season, generally you're looking at a team that is getting better in the back end of its pitching staff. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of this year, Cincinnati's way higher on this list.
All right, Steve. Hey, we're up against it. Thank you very much as always. We'll talk to you next week, okay?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. See you next week.
Every time, Steve Makinen, editor for, of course, Point Spread Weekly, out every single Wednesday here at VSiN, VSiN.com. Remember, VSiN.com/subscribe is the spot because your PSW subs are free. VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. You don't have to worry about paying anything like Welcome back to Point Spread Weekly. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. So a reminder, the Quick Picks, they launched their new virtual sports game featuring NBA stars back on April 1st. And now, just in time for this week's draft, Quick Picks Virtual has NFL head-to-head matchups. They're coming to the rescue of all you players looking for action during the shutdown of all our major sport leagues. Joe Bunevith is nice enough to give us a couple of minutes to discuss what is going down with Quick Picks Virtual. Joe, thanks for the time again today. So for those who have not been invested here with Quick Picks, first off, walk us through the setup here with Quick Picks and what you're offering to some people who want to get down on some action. We can start with the NBA before we get to the new offering of the NFL, but walk us through a match here. If I'm signing up for Quick Picks, what am I sitting down? What am I signing up for? And what exactly am I picking?
Yeah, we offer picks you can make 24 hours a day. We offer NBA and we offer, like you just said, we offer NFL as well. So what we have done is created a game based on historical data. We call it Quick Picks Virtual. You're able to pick a player and its season that's marked. Say like LeBron James 2013 or Stephen Curry 2015. Which one what you think had a better season? The computer will randomly go select a game from that actual season and match those players up using a fantasy sports scoring, standard fantasy sports scoring. And then we have a result. So you pick at least 3 and you pick up to 10. We pay 5-1 on 3 and up to 500-1 on 10. You can win up to $50,000 on a $100 entry. And,
wow. So when it comes, go ahead.
Yep. And then we just launched the NFL game, brand new this week. We answered the age-old question, who's better in their prime, Aaron Rodgers 2014 or Peyton Manning 2013? We go back almost 20 years with our NFL data. Zeke Elliott 2016 or Adrian Peterson 2012. The system will go grab an actual game from that season, match those 2 players up, and then you have your result. We offer 100% deposit bonus up to $100. We're available in 28 states, including California, Illinois, New York, and Florida.
So when you look at just what you've seen from your response up to this point, right? I mean, it's been a while since we've had a sporting event. We have the NFL draft going on, as we mentioned. So what's the response been like for you guys? It's been
quite amazing, honestly. It's a little strange having one of the only sports betting games on the planet available. And the funny thing is we actually talked about creating this product Our actual engine is obviously a live version. We have the same game, but for live sports. But since there isn't any live sports, we went and created a historical virtual version. So we were talked about it for years about creating this product, and granted, by force of market, here it is.
I like it. So, and when you look at this from the NBA standpoint, obviously, right, I think that would be extremely popular just because, like the other day, for example, I had a buddy in a group chat for no reason whatsoever drop the bomb. Who do you think's better, MJ or LeBron? And immediately everybody goes insane and starts texting back and forth and blowing my phone up. But you can answer questions like that and win a little bit of money doing it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the documentaries come out, and now the MJ story is back into the forefront, while LeBron was having a quite a big season, and it's quite unfortunate how he got a little cut short. I mean, maybe they come back and finish it. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's the arguments we need. These are the discussions we're having now, where everybody's watching old baseball games and old games that are being broadcast constantly by the major sports, and these are the discussions that we have. We're every single sports fan that loves active sports is certainly nostalgic about the sports that they grew up on, the sports that they watch, the teams that they belong to. So we've got a product that allows you to honestly use your edge to place action on it.
We got less than a minute left. Right now, you have NBA and NFL. Any thoughts to adding to the pool in terms of sports at this point?
Baseball's coming. Yes, we're going to have virtual baseball coming up pretty soon.
All right, I like it, and I will be waiting with bated breath for that one. Joe Bunevith with us. Joe, we appreciate a couple of minutes here today. Thank you very much. One more time for people who are out there, where they can sign up and how they can get in touch and start playing with Quick Picks.
Yep, just head over to quickpicks.com. Click the sign-in link / VSiN bonus, and you'll get a 100% deposit bonus up to $100.
All right, I like it. Joe, thank you for the time. Very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Again, Joe Bunevith, and check it out, quickpicks.com / VSiN bonus. All right, when we return here on Point Spread Weekly, we get back to the magazine. Ron Flatter's going to join us. We'll talk about his piece as we continue our road toward the Kentucky Derby. Welcome back into Point Spread Weekly. I'm your host, Jonathan Von Tobel. Again, a reminder, VSiN.com /subscribe. All of your Plus subs free until major returns. All right, Ron Flatter, nice enough to give us a couple of minutes. He does weekly here on Point Spread Weekly. And Ron, I'm decided to dub this, Joseph, let's make some production, the Run for the Roses, because we have all of these months and weeks leading up to the Kentucky Derby. But the content is still there, and there's a lot to get to. But, you had a piece today. DeJulio shies away from Derby futures. It was about your conversation with Bruno DeJulio, handicapper. You talked to him on the Ron Flatter Racing Pod. So what were some of his general thoughts about handling the futures at this point, given that the landscape has shifted? And you mentioned this before, right? And tell me if I have this correctly. This point of the year is more like January in a normal horse racing year, correct?
Yeah, exactly, Jonathan. And what Bruno says is stay the hell away from futures. He doesn't go into them until maybe if we were to have this calendar moved forward, he'll wait until July for a September 5th Kentucky Derby. So his process is, and by the way, we're talking about Bruno DeJulio. He is probably the best workout analyst in the country, watching horses in the morning, and a pretty damn good handicapper too. So he's been at this over 30 years. His point is, we don't know about horses like Arrogate. We don't know about horses like West Coast. Those were 2-3-year-old champions in recent years for Bob Baffert. They didn't have their first races as 3-year-olds until around Derby time, and it wasn't in the Derby, maybe in an allowance race. And then they would wind up winning the Travers, which is always in late August, 1 week before the Kentucky Derby is now. So his point is, wait. Take a look and see horses that are going to be blooming as we go forward. We're talking about 3.5-year-olds this year. And so it's almost like watching, as he put it, Tom Brady in college. Not really distinguished there, but certainly blew much more as a professional.
So what, before we get into some of the horses who are hot and who aren't, what is up next here on the schedule in terms of the races that we want to keep an eye on?
Well, interestingly enough, where next week we have the Arkansas Derby, which is going to be at Oaklawn Park on what would have been Kentucky Derby Day. Now, it's going to be a loaded field, so loaded they may actually have to split the race in half and have it as 2 races. So you'll see some horses like Nadal and Charlatan, hopefully, who are going to come in for Bob Baffert. Wells Bayou, who's also a short price horse right now in futures. That's next week. This week, we've got a few races at Gulfstream Park, Oaklawn Park, that are going to be bringing back horses we haven't seen for a while. Horses like 8 Rings from the Bob Baffert barn. Hasn't done very well, hasn't raced in a while since he was on the winning trail last year. He's going to be in a stakes race tomorrow at Oaklawn Park. So you look at him. We're also going to have some horses in allowance races. We saw one just yesterday when Untitled won an allowance race at Gulfstream Park and won so going away at 1 to 9 odds. So that was a tune-up. These horses are just looking for races, and their trainers and owners are just looking for races for them since there are not a lot of racetracks open. So right now it's a little disjointed until we get to the Arkansas Derby next week.
I know that there's certain races and tracks that kind of correlate to having success at others. Is anything with Arkansas? Is Arkansas one of those where success on the Arkansas Derby track maybe translate over to the Run for the Roses in the Kentucky Derby?
Oh, you better believe it. In fact, a little horse by the name of American Pharaoh used the Arkansas Derby on his way to the Triple Crown. This is really a very good proving ground that Bob Baffert has used before for some of his 3-year-olds and used that as a springboard to get them to the Kentucky Derby. The problem, of course, now is it's 4 months out, so we're going to be needing another springboard somewhere in between, and that hasn't been declared yet because we still don't know when the Preakness will be. We don't know when the Belmont Stakes will be. Hearing some noise that they may try and keep the Belmont Stakes in June, which would be really interesting. You'd be talking about a 1.5 mile race for 3-year-olds that haven't even run 1.25 miles yet. I'll believe that when I see it.
Again, we're talking with Ron Flatter about his piece. DeJulio shies away from Derby Futures. A good nugget, by the way, on that, too, the development of horses and getting ready for, the Derby distance of 1.25 miles and the way the horses have been bred a little bit differently, but all that's in Point Spread Weekly. So let's go over some of the horses, hot and not. Hot horses, you got a long shot here, Earner at 125 to 1, and then one of the shorter ones, Nadal at 8 to 1. What's the status on these two?
Well, let's talk about Nadal first. He'll be in the Arkansas Derby next week. And the only reason I say he's a little cold is because his odds in the global markets drift a little bit. Actually, his shortened. He went from 8 to 1 to 7 to 1. Authentic in the Bob Baffert barn went from 8 to 1 to 9 to 1. But that's for global markets. As far as domestic markets, they're pretty much holding steady with short prices. We were reaching a little bit for hot and not there. Earner is 125 to 1 at William Hill. He is racing for a trainer named Steve Asmussen. If you're into horse racing, you certainly know who he is. Hall of Famer. He's won everything except the Kentucky Derby. 0 for 20. Best trainer going right now, he and Chad Brown, who've never won a Kentucky Derby. But Asmussen has no fewer than 10 horses right now on the William Hill Derby Futures. And Earner's an interesting one. He broke his maiden with a 3 3/4 length victory in an 8.5 furlong race this month at Oaklawn Park. So that's one you look for because he's already gone a couple turns. You always look at horses going 2 turns for the first time because that's, of course, what the Kentucky Derby will wind up being.
And the two that are not, you have Authentic sitting at about 9 to 2, and shocking, Ron, that a horse sitting at 501 or that was at 501 is actually kind of cold.
Yeah. Scoring, another one of the Steve Asmussen horses. Let's call that his 11th horse. He's now only 2 for 7 with $70,000 in earnings. He actually came in to the Asmussen barn on a claim. He finished 5th in the Grade 3 Sham at Santa Anita. Before that, he's just going the wrong direction. So if you were looking at scoring as being an overlay, no, I'd say 500 to 1 might be an underlay.
All right. Well, Ron also, of course, and we're up against it, but Ron also has a second piece. It's a good reason to go to Point Spread Weekly and read Asian Leagues Fill the Baseball Void. But my biggest takeaway from this piece, which was very well written, Ron, they have cardboard cutouts of fans in the stands?
Yeah. The Rakuten Monkeys of Taiwan, who are 7-0 right now, they have put cardboard cutouts in the stands to replace fans. Some of them are even robotic, JVT. So home field advantage for the team that is as dominant now in Taiwan as the Yankees were here in the 50s.
I like it. All right. Again, Point Spread Weekly. Ron's got two pieces up there. Joins us weekly, of course, as we are using this time to get ready for the Kentucky Derby. Ron, always good to talk to you, man. We'll talk to you next week, okay? All
right. Saddle up then. See you, JVT.
Got it. Again, Ron Flatter, the two pieces for him as you look at the horses who are not in hot and not. DeJulio shies away from Derby futures, and the other as Asian leagues fill the baseball void. It's actually a really good breakdown on the Asian leagues and baseball in general that you can get into. That Flatter's written for Point Spread Weekly. All right, we get back to the traditional sports, the National Football League on the other side. We have win totals in the NFL from William Hill. All right, welcome back in. Last few minutes here on Point Spread Weekly. Make sure you go to vsin.com/subscribe. VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns, so check it out. No credit card, nothing you don't have to worry about. Canceling, paying, nothing. Again, free until major sport returns, and they are chock full of information every single week. And Will Hill, nice enough to give us a couple of minutes to go over his 6 good bets that emerged and over-under wins in the National Football League. Not the William Hill, the namesake for the operator, but just William Hill. Again, at Twitter, at not the Will Hill. Will, appreciate some time. So let's go over these one by one. I wanted to start, and we did talk earlier in the week. I want to get in a little bit more detail on a lot of these, right? So the Broncos win total over 7.5. You brought up a good point on the Lombardi line. I want you to reiterate for folks who are listening, because when it comes to evaluating win totals, a lot of the times, you obviously want to look at what happened last year. You want to look at what happened in some of these coin flip spots. The Broncos were victims, of just really terrible coin flip spots that they lost very close games a season ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at it, 7 wins last year. You need 8 wins to cash this year. I mean, they were leading the Colts with 20 seconds left. They were leading the Bears with 3 seconds left. They were leading the Jaguars with 3 seconds left. They led the Vikings by 20 points in the second half. They went 0-4 in those 4 games. So, I mean, that says it all right there. That's pretty hard to do. Usually luck evens out in these things. And, they'll get Chubb back. They played a lot of last year with Flacco, with Allen. Barring injury, those guys aren't going to start again. So, I mean, Locke played well. And now he's got Judy. He's got Fant. He's got a lot of weapons. Sutton, the 2 running backs. If he's any good, they should be able to score. And that's always been their issue. I mean, I think they're good to get an extra win or 2 here.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you factor in the development of a guy like Locke? Because you looked at his numbers from last year, like the win-loss record was great, right? He was 4-1 as a starter. But the other numbers, right, like just over 200 yards passing, well under 7 yards per attempt. So kind of some pedestrian numbers as a passer. When you're looking at win totals, how do you factor in the development of a second-year quarterback like Locke?
I think it's an unknown. I think any of us, that would say we know what he's going to do would be lying or kind of projecting more than we probably know. But, look what the comparison. Flacco did nothing last year. He looked shot. The yards per attempt, all that. Allen was a guy, a lot of people, when they named him the starter, a lot of people didn't even know who he was. So as long as Locke is average, a little above average, he had some games last year. I know he lit up the Texans. As long as he's average, I think you got a good bet here.
Yep. All right, so let's look at a couple of the other win totals again that Will has zeroed in on here for this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly. The other intriguing one is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars, under 5.5. I thought Jacksonville in the draft, in the first round at least on Thursday, William, did what bad teams should do when they're drafting. You don't go and try to get a quarterback. You don't go try to get a wide receiver, which they were tied to, right? Those are pieces that you can go get in later drafts or later rounds. You want to draft guys who are going to provide some consistency on the defensive end, and they went and did that. But guys like that aren't going to be massive impacts for a team that looks to be up against it from a win totals perspective. So what do you see with Jacksonville? Win total 5.5, over or under, and why?
I like the under, and I think they're going to try to go under, which is it's a big help when the team is trying to help you out. I think that we have a common goal when you're betting the under. I think they're going to try to get Trevor Lawrence. They're really in a tough division, and there's an old line, when you're in a tough division, you have the hardest schedule because you don't get to play yourself. The Colts the Texans, the Titans, they each get 2 layups against the Jaguars. The Jaguars, they obviously don't get to play the Jaguars. So that's 6 rough games. You know, when there is no easy out, you are the easy out. And they weren't very good last year. They lost a few pieces in Campbell, Boye, Foles. They might get rid of Fournette. I just don't think they're going to try very hard.
Yep. Fournette. How about Yannick Ngakoue, who seems to be on his way out as well, right?
Exactly.
So you're going to be not only are the pieces going to be gone, but you're plugging them in with young guys who are going to take their lumps in the NFL in the first year and move forward. But again, it's an interesting way to build because maybe in 2 years from now, maybe even 3 years from now, they are more like the team that made a little bit of a run toward the AFC Championship game. It lost ultimately to the Patriots. So Jags under 5.5, Broncos over 7.5. Let's talk about the Houston Texans here. This is an intriguing one. You were going against the grain. The Texans over their win total of 8. We know about the tumultuous offseason, right? We know about getting rid of Hopkins and acquiring David Johnson, maybe the third best running back on the Arizona Cardinals. Bill O'Brien is not afraid to wheel and deal as GM, but this also ties into a little bit of, kind of fading the general perception of what the Texans are and Bill O'Brien's perception as a coach, which you've brought up.
Yeah, I mean, the guy takes a lot of crap, but I don't think he's great. You mentioned the other day, situationally, he's not great. I mean, he's not Bill Belichick, but he wins. I mean, if Watson doesn't tear his ACL in 2017, they're going for their 6th straight AFC South title. I mean, he won a division with Hoyer and Mallett, that combination. He won a division with Osweiler. He won a playoff game with Osweiler. So, I mean, this guy wins. He's not popular on Twitter. I understand all that, and he's not great, but he's good. I think he's become underrated, and in wide receivers, one position you can really replace. I mean, they're going to have Cooks, they're going to have Fuller, they're going to have Randall Cobb. And they have a premier player at the most important position in Watson. And I mean, they get the Jags twice, they get the Lions, they get the Bengals. I think it's an overreaction of the Hopkins trade. And I mean, if Hopkins was so valuable, how come they didn't get more back for him? That's the other thing. And you're trading the guy that high profile. I compare it a lot to, like, if I said, hey, do you want to buy my car? Wouldn't you be like, hey, what's wrong with your car? So why was Hopkins available? Why did he go for more? I think there's some underlying issues there in terms of, locker room chemistry with Watson that might be good for them. I think they're a 9-10 win team. I like the over here.
When you look at the division overall, the potential improvement of like the Indianapolis Colts, I say potential. I'm not sure if Philip Rivers will actually work out. The Tennessee Titans. Right, so like in the Tennessee Titans, I still think they're floating around a 9-win team. But what do you make of the division overall around them? Does that, make you nervous a little bit that it's going to be a very hotly contested division among those 3 teams?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, I think you could make a case for any of those 3 teams winning the division. I wouldn't be shocked. I would think the Titans would come back to earth a little bit. They were 9-7. They really, they rode Henry into the ground. I would. The carries he had at the end of the year, I would have a hard time seeing that being duplicated. I would be surprised if that didn't have an effect on Henry, going into this year. And you look at some of we remember them winning playoff games, but throwing for 72 yards like Tannehill did, 86 yards, these crazy totals, and still winning. I don't want to say flukish because they have good players, but, I'm not totally sold on the Titans duplicating that. I think the Texans, like I said, they're solid. I mean, Watson's a legit MVP candidate. Like you said, you don't know about Rivers. You don't know about Brissett. Rivers looked shot last year at times, and maybe with better protection, he'll be better. And I think it'll be a tough division, but you only need to hit 9 here. I think they're good for 9s.
Yep. It's another conversation for another day, but I think you're absolutely right. Derrick Henry is a really good back, but we love what happened in the last 8 games. Actually, I would say 6 games of the season when you factor in the postseason. He only had one 100-yard game in the first 9, so it's just something to watch for the Tennessee Titans. All right, let's go to a couple of these other. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it reminds me a little bit of the Cubs using Aroldis Chapman to compare it to another sport. Remember they had the Chapman for the World Series run, and they're throwing him 2-3 innings every game. His velocity's never been the same. I mean, he still throws 100, but he doesn't throw 104. I mean, that stuff, it catches up to you.
All right, let's go to another one. I like this one as well. So the Vikings, 8.5 is their win total. The initial thought is, okay, well, they're in a division, obviously, with the Green Bay Packers, who went 13-3 last year. But the Green Bay Packers one of the worst 13-3 teams in the history of the NFL. If you look at the DVOA metrics. So what do you expect here for the Vikings, over or under 8.5?
I like the over, like you said, at Green Bay. I mean, they were 13-3, but I believe they were outgained on the year, which is really hard to believe. And Now with drafting a quarterback, who knows how that affects the Packers? I can't imagine Rodgers is too happy. He's kind of a prickly guy to begin with. But look, Zimmer, this is more of a Zimmer bet. He's 57-38 for his career, 62% against the spread, which is the best in the league. I mean, that's people forget they were 10-4 last year, and they took the last 2 games off. So they were locked into the 6th seed. They couldn't win the division. So I mean, they really took the last 2 games off against the Bears and the Packers. They could have gotten to 11 or 12, and if you don't go over here, you're counting on them going back to 8 wins. I just think that's a lot. I trust Zimmer to put a good product on the field. They have a lot of picks. I know they lost Griffin, they lost Diggs, but I think that's expecting a lot from them to go to where they were last year, winning the playoff game, to going all the way back to an 8-8 team. I trust Zimmer is the bottom line there.
And the last one here, and again, we're talking with William Hill and his work up in Point Spread Weekly. 6 good bets emerging in over-under wins for the National Football League. The Browns, their win total of 8.5. Is this the year where the Browns become what we expect them to be last year?
No. Why do we keep giving them the benefit of the doubt? I mean, they haven't made the playoffs since 2002. I mean, their playoff drought is old enough to vote at this point. I just don't understand. Like last year, they get Beckham in March, and everyone assumes just hands them the title, the AFC North title, and anoints them like the next great team. I just don't see it. I think they have issues at quarterback, offensive line. Their defense is okay. I don't know why we give them the benefit of the doubt of being a winning team. I think, if they go 8-8 here, you still win. I got to see it to believe it with them. When you lost for like 100 years straight, I'm not convinced till I see it with them. That's the bottom line. Stefanski, who knows his head coach, I just think they have a lot of unknowns. They got a lot of flash with Landry and Chubb and, Kareem Hunt, all these guys we know from fantasy football, but I just think that the essence of football is blocking and tackling, and I'm not sure how good they are at either of those.
Yep. And, by the way, their division got a little bit better because Roethlisberger's back, and that was a top 5 defense with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's another factor that goes into the Cleveland Browns and the potential downfall again of Cleveland, which we're used to at this point. William Hill, follow on Twitter at @NotTheWillHill. Hey, William, good work in Point Spread Weekly. Appreciate the time today, okay?
JVT, appreciate it, man. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Again, Will's piece, 6 good bets emerging in over-under wins. You can go and find that in Point Spread Weekly, along with Ron Flatter's work, along with Steve Makinen's work. You can also go back and judge my super awesome mock draft, if you will. Ignore the one I submitted right before the draft. I think this is my best work up to this point. Matt Humans is in there as well. But again, it's a lot of draft coverage, but there's much, much more in this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly than just mock draft. So, and by the way, there's also best bets in there too that extend past the first round. So as the draft goes on, make sure you check out everything in Point Spread Weekly. And one more reminder that VSiN Plus subs are free. So go to vsin.com/subscribe. Check it out. Until a major sport returns, you won't have to worry about shelling out any dough whatsoever for a VSiN Plus sub. So check out what you're missing when it comes to VSiN. All right, we'll see you later. It's Point Spread Weekly on the Sports Betting Network.